small these days. And maybe it would have been better for us to be seated out there. But can you see Lorna at all? I hope you can. Can you see me? When thinking about interviewing Lorna Wing for this session, I immediately thought I would have to bring some sort of prize. And thinking about the Oscars the other day, 2 days ago, they were sort of given out to people who hadn't really achieved as much as Lorna Wing in a lifetime. If I were ever asked to present an Oscar for a lifetime achievement in autism, of course it could only be one person, as I think everybody knows, and it would have to be Lorna. Lorna Wing is the outstanding, not just lady, but the figurehead of autism, and she has been for almost 50 years. And the fantastic thing about Lorna Wing is that she's always been right about everything. And you can't say that about me, you can't say that about other people in the field, but you can actually go back to Lorna Wing's original writings and find that there wasn't really anything she got wrong. She got it all right from the beginning. And the fantastic contribution that she has made to the field, in spite of being right from the beginning, is even more, I think, outstanding because of that. Her thinking has stood the test of time, and we all have to come back to Lorna for questions. What is it really like? What do you think? If we want, I'm going to ask Lorna that later, if we want a litmus test for what's right in autism, we only need Lorna. We can just bring her in and ask, what do you think? And, well, she'll know. But I'm not going to go into any detail about Lorna Wing's other fantastic achievements in the field, but use this time hopefully to get some sort of new formulations from Lorna out in this context. And I've prepared Lorna with a few questions asking, do you think it's okay to ask these questions? Actually, of course, as always, Lorna was the one to tell me, do you have any questions at all? And so I needed to think about what I wanted to ask her. So one of the first things I would like to ask Lorna is, given your extensive experience and your very, very long perspective on autism, what do you think is the core deficit in autism? And is there any kind of test that can actually say, well, this is definitely autism and that is definitely not autism?
Well, I'll start with your last statement. There is no test which can say this is definitely autism and that isn't. I wish there were. It would make life so much easier for everybody, parents and professionals and the children themselves. So what do I think is the most important aspect? Well, over the years, my colleagues and I have been very interested in what we think is the lack of a social instinct in people with autistic disorders. And we think the social instinct underlies the social interaction, social communication, and what we call social imagination, which is the ability to think inside your head about the consequences of your actions on yourself and on other people. That we think of as social imagination. We think it's very important, and we're sorry to see that it's not mentioned in DSM 4 or 5 or anything. But we're listening to the talks given today. I've been fascinated by all the talks I've heard and have thought a great deal about them. And I'm very interested in the discussions of the problems that arise because autistic people seem unable to deal with a lot of facts and ideas and thoughts and put them together and make something out of them. They seem to have to concentrate on one single thing at a time. And whereas us neurotypicals, if that's what we are, can actually bring together a whole load of different facts and theories and thoughts and then make something of them and do it very quickly, within a few seconds, really, in some situations. And I'm going to think very hard about how that relates to the problems of the social instinct, whether it's, one of the important underlying problems. And I'm very grateful to the speakers at the conference in these last 2 days who've discussed this sort of thing.
Actually, I'm thinking also about the fact that if you follow up people or young people with autism into adult age, what you find is many problems tend to be overcome, although speed isn't one of them. Even in those who appear to be quick and, very even impulsive, the processing speed of some of the things that you were talking about is very, very slow. They need so much more time to solve the problem. It's not that they can't do it, but it takes an enormous amount of time. And even in social matters, when you get the impression that this person actually does have the full understanding of the social situation, in order to process it and to react appropriately in the here and now situation, it takes a long time. The social instinct thing, I was wondering whether you think there's any way of sort of getting down to what it really is. I mean, I think we can both sort of understand what we mean with it, but do other people understand it? If we say it's the social instinct that's the problem.
I doubt whether everybody immediately understands that. I mean, one of the reasons I find it so fascinating is because one of my Asperger traits is a great love of animals, and I watch a lot of animal programs, and seeing the social instinct in animals like lions, the way they are very social together, and the difference between them and tigers, which are not such social animals, but tigers love their babies, that's they've got that part of the social instinct. And you look through the animal kingdom and into other sorts of animals like insects and so on, and you see aspects of social instinct across the board. It really is a very fascinating and important aspect of life. And we don't really fully understand it at all. We don't understand where it happens in the brain or anything about it.
When it comes to the social imagination bits that I know you've been not obsessed with, but at least very interested in for a long period of time, when other people have taken your views as reflecting your point that repetitive behaviors are, a reflection of social imagination problems, and to the point where they consider repetitive behaviors in themselves to be social imagination problems. I think, as you suggested in your comment about the DSM-4, DSM-5, etc., that this aspect, which might actually be at the core of autism, the lack of social imagination, at least when we get to an age like in school age or adults with autism, that this is the major problem and the remaining major problem in the social domain. The fact that you can't sort of think about the consequences of what you are saying or doing or acting out.
I suppose it leads to their total honesty and their ability to say anything that's true, despite the fact that it upsets other people. That sort of thing arises from the...
Exactly. But do you think then that, in fact, actually some of the repetitive things that we tend to associate with autism should not be in the manuals, like flapping and finger flicking? Or
it's very difficult to know, because you see that so much among those children who with more typical classic autism and learning disabilities as well. That's where you really see that. And not so much among the more able ones, although I think some of them do it in private in their bedrooms.
I think so too. But maybe it's not core. Maybe it's not needed for the core sort of diagnosis.
Could be. And of course, the more things you put down as essential, the fewer people you're able to include. The smaller you make the list of essentials, the more people you can include.
Do you think the fact that Kanner once, even though I think Leon Eisenberg and maybe yourself were the only ones who actually thought about what was it exactly that Kanner demanded for making a diagnosis, and of course he did demand that it be associated with complex rituals or insistence on sameness.
Yes.
Do you think that is an absolute? Or could somebody be, as it were, autistic and not have that insistence on sameness?
Yes, I think you would find that they had the ability to concentrate very hard on one thing, their special interest and so on, but it might not show itself as a repetitive routine. Among the very able people, I think you'd find that.
Because in your own sort of original description of the triad that we all sort of embrace and everybody uses it in clinical practice, I think you've always maintained that it's social. It's social interaction, social communication, and social imagination, which is a bit different than what it's come to be conceptualized as.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And I think the new genetic evidence actually supports that.
Really?
Yes, that it's the social and repetitive things don't necessarily, fall. They in genetic research they tend to fall apart.
Right.
And the higher up in the sort of IQ levels that you get in your genetic research, it falls more and more apart. So it only hangs together as a repetitive plus social communication thing in the very low functioning group.
Well, of course, we don't really know the answers to anything yet, so I think we have to be broad-minded about it. And
you've always been very broad-minded about it. I think most people have felt that now we're onto it, now we really know what it's all about. I was one of the people who felt when the theory of mind business, came on board, that yes, we're onto it. I don't think so anymore. I think, of course, that was a huge breakthrough in many ways. But on the other hand, it's I think, as I said this morning, that the more we know about this, the less we understand it.
Yes, I'm afraid that's true. Yes.
Because we know so much now about the brain that we didn't do 10 years ago, and it makes, you become, you're awestruck when you think about how much we know. And the little we know about autism is relatively much less now than it was 10 years ago.
I'm afraid so.
So what do you see then as the essentials in a diagnostic assessment if you were to, say, prescribe to all of us what do you need to do in terms of diagnosing autism?
Well, my colleagues, particularly Judy Gould and myself, what we think is very, very important is to get a detailed history from infancy onwards, if you possibly can. If you've got an informant like a parent, that's fine. With adults, it becomes more difficult to find such an informant, but you need to collect whatever you can from the notes that have been written elsewhere, insofar as you can, and collect what you can from the person themselves, though they're not the best of informants, of course. But what we feel is so important is that you should collect information not only about the things that are specific to autism, like the social interaction and the social communication and so on, but collect across the board so that you get a complete picture of the development of the person concerned, their language development, their motor development, their sensory development, everything you can think of, their behaviour and so on, so that you've got a complete picture of the way that person changed from an infant to wherever they are now. And that is because, I'll say this to you because you said it very clearly earlier on, that autism occurs in different styles, different patterns, and it can occur together with anything else. It can occur together with any physical problem, any psychiatric problem, any developmental problem. And the idea in DSM-4 that you exclude that you say you can't diagnose autism as if ADHD is there.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. It's absolutely balmy. I think it's because the DSM system and the ICD system were developed by committees. And the saying that I like is, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And I think committees are the worst sorts of people to produce these things. Yeah. But the idea that you can exclude anything, exclude autism on the presence of any other disability, is not right. In fact, it's very common indeed, for autism to occur together with other diagnosable disabilities, and to make a proper sort of assessment of a person and to write up a good report on an individual with suggestions for helping them, you really need to understand all the problems that they have and all the skills they've got. The whole lot. You've got to have both.
But what about the need for observation of the individual?
Oh yes. That's part of the collection of information about them.
But do you think it needs to be done in the sort of way that some people think that for anybody to be diagnosed with autism, you have to have, say, an ADOS or another observation?
Well, it's fine to have that. We get psychological tests done with colleagues on the people who come to see us for diagnosis, and we find them very helpful. They add to the picture that you put together.
So moving on to what to do about autism, what do you think are important cornerstones of intervention?
Well, it's a bit complicated really, but what I think one aims to do, first of all, the person who's designing the treatment, the management, the help, has got to understand autism. Nobody who doesn't understand autism and really knows what it feels like and what it's like to be inside an autistic person, that sort of person can't design a decent way of helping. The first thing that needs to be done is to understand the individual that you're dealing with and to know what are their skills and what are their disabilities, because one of the ways in which you get the cooperation of the person concerned is if you help them to use their skills and interests. You need to understand what interests them and use that as a basis for interacting with them. Rather than concentrating on the things that they do wrong and the things that are a problem, concentrate on what they enjoy and what they really like doing. And you need to have a picture of the whole person with their skills, disabilities and so on, and their interest and all that. And start by trying to plan an environment for them which is very predictable, very organised, and in which they feel comfortable. And you need to provide, as Ina was saying, provide a lot of information in a visual way, so that because visual presentations tend to be much better understood than any other variety, so that you build up this world which is comfortable and enjoyable and reassuring for them. And then little by little you take each little bit and try to expand their ability to engage with this particular aspect and find ways to make them feel more comfortable, to expand their skills and abilities in that area. It takes a long time, but it is a useful way of progressing to make the world more understandable, less frightening for the person concerned.
What's your take on the need for everybody to have 40 hours of training every week?
Well, Well, if that works out all right and it's possible, yes. But there are situations where that couldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to adjust to what the time you've got and what you can do.
Do you think it's possible that sometimes and in some situations it can actually occasionally be not the right thing to do?
Yes, yes. I'm not someone who thinks that one rule is always always correct. I think that in planning what you're going to do with to help a person, it's important not to be misled by all the masses of suggestions for things that cure autism, help autism, and so on. Such a lot of it about medication or other sorts of approaches. There's little or no support for any of these more outrageous ideas about how to help a person with autism. Basically, the thing to do is to understand them and help them bit by bit to come to grips with the world. And you can only get so far, but depends very much on the individual, how far you can get, and their level of ability. Those two things. You can't say that all people with high IQ are going to respond, but on the whole, the more able they are, the more they'll respond. But that isn't always the case.
No. Bruce, you've got 5 minutes.
Yeah. So if you look back over these past 50 years, or 80 years, or 82, or whatever, and looking specifically at autism in the past 50 years, when it's been very important to yourself, how have your own views changed in terms of, or have they, in terms of what it is?
Oh, yes. You see, the reason I got interested in working in the field was because I had a daughter with autism. Although she was a female and, less common in them, she had classic Kanner's autism, absolutely classic. And she influenced this. I mean, I thought that was what autism was like across the board. All the autistic people had Kanner's syndrome. But I can't remember why it happened, but I did get hold of Asperger's first paper, written in 1944. Now, it was in German, I couldn't understand German, didn't learn it at school, but my husband, John Wing, he learnt German at school, and he read it to me, translated it to me, and we were absolutely fascinated by what Asperger was writing, and I had seen a few people who fitted his descriptions, and that's what really got me very much involved. And of course, as you know very well, Judy and I did a study of, we thought that everybody with autism had low IQs in those days. That was before we knew about the Asperger work. And we did a study in Camberwell looking at everybody in that range of IQ, and we found the same as had been found. But what was the name of the first person who did
the Dutch person, or no?
No, who's
Lotte.
That's Lotte. Vic Lotte. That's right. We found the same sort of around the same prevalence as him. And but then, by the time we'd finished the study, John had read Asperger's paper to me, and we had seen some individuals. We were asked to see individuals at the Maudsley Hospital who were inpatients there, and sometimes we were asked to see them, and some of them fitted Asperger's descriptions. And then you came in and you did your study using the same system as we did on people with IQ over 70. Yeah. And you found 3 or 4 times as many as we did. Yeah. So there we were. It was much more common to have autism and a higher IQ, an IQ over 70, right up to genius level, than to have an IQ under 70, 3 or 4 times as common. And that was really the beginning of all this, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's why the whole view of it has changed. And I must confess that listening to all the talks here, my mind is full of new ideas and thoughts that I've got to go through. So it's been a great experience.
Well, thank you, Lorna. That's really fantastic to hear from you that you're still on the ball and that you're still going to think anew on this subject, which you have done over so many years. And even though, as I said, everything Lorna said from the beginning was true, the truth is gradually evolving as we see it in front of our eyes. And Lorna Wing, of course, has been one, perhaps the major contributor to knowledge development in the field. Without her, and without the discovery, as it were, with this idea about the Asperger's actually fitting into the spectrum, I don't think we would have been anywhere near as where we are now. We would still be on the Kanner autism track. And I'm often complaining about Kanner in the sense that he was marvelous in descriptive terms. But the fact that if he hadn't written his paper, and if Asperger's had been famous from the beginning, maybe we would have been where we are now 20 years ago.
Because Kanner never mentioned Asperger.
No.
Never. Although Asperger
Very often mentioned
yes,
Kanner.
Yes.
Well, we'll always mention Lorna Wing anyway. Thank you so much, Lorna. It really was.